Hi, everyone. It's Mandy. Before we go into it, patrons, you are everything. Thank you so much for being supporters of the show, supporters of the Restorative Grief platform everywhere it's found. Because I've been doing this for a while now, but I tell you, running with others makes it so much more enjoyable. So if you're interested in all the premium content, exclusive interviews coming up, or even just supporting the methods and the work because you know it makes an impact in your life and in others, then we would love to have you join us. Check out the show notes for links, and that's it. Let's get into it. Welcome back to Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart. You are listening to episode 84, titled When Will This Get Easier? This week, we are answering a client question aloud. It's a conversation I have often in one-on-one sessions, so it's a perfect fit for the show. When does grief get easier? Will it ever get easier? Is easier even the right way to phrase this question? We're going to tackle all of these questions and more from my perspective as a trauma-informed certified grief educator and coach. The way we do the work is equally as important as whether or not we do the work at all. As any mason will tell you, the bricks can't be layered incorrectly lest the whole building tumbles from poor workmanship, because lives are at stake here, people, especially yours. So let's look at a few foundational characteristics of intentional and lasting grief work that you can begin implementing today. This next statement might earn me some hate mail, but I need to say it anyway. The majority of grievers are not intentionally grieving. Most of the time, we are simply attempting to survive the day ahead without an onslaught of tears or other emotional disturbances. We keep our anger at bay, opting for numbness over expressions that may feel way too vulnerable. And I get it. It makes perfect sense that we would try to keep our lives as stable and steady as they ever were before. But wisdom and research tells us that after a grief event, we are changed, irrevocably so, and no one is immune. So rather than continuing in a distorted mindset of believing we're untouchable and that no uncomfortable or bad thing will affect us, we get to choose a more rational thought about our lives and therefore craft a more intentional and helpful foundation for ourselves to explore who we are now after our losses. There's a popular grief resource in the world right now that will tell you that it's the first 2 years after a quote, significant loss that will be devastating. And then you'll start to unwind the tension. And for a while, I thought that was really true. I was about 2 years into the loss of my mom before I started recognizing a different way of existing in my own world. But then again, I also wasn't doing much of the intentional grief work I now know that I needed. At the time, I was simply looking for a way through my pain without ever facing it directly. So, fast forward to the 2 year mark, and I realized my initial intentions right after her death were quickly steamrolled by my loss of sense of self. I wanted to spend the 2 years after she died exploring what grief meant for me and how to support myself through it. But instead, I explored all the ways I was disappointed and angry and struggling to find wholeness in my life. Now, wholeness and the pursuit of self are not mutually exclusive, but they did lead me to feel disconnected more often than not from my grief in those initial 2 years because I saw them as fully separate things. But meaningful grief work is not about the duration of time we have between our loss event and our present day. Our grief work is meaningful when we set our intentions on the work itself and look for what creates meaning in our lives according to what we know to be true, what we actually can settle on as a core and rational belief, and the values that we hold. This does not mean we won't have moments when we pivot. Our grief work should evolve as we learn new information. Whether it's a new framework of support, a new understanding about how the brain works, or even learning new information about the grief event itself, we will shift in how we process our loss over time. And there will always be days that are more intense and complicated than others. Anniversaries, birth dates, and even more so, holidays, death dates, diagnosis dates, travel dates. There is always going to be a day on the calendar that's just a little harder than the rest. You may not even be looking at a calendar until after you notice that you're feeling a lot less integrated in your body. If you listened to last week's conversation with Becky McCoy, you'll recall we talked about how the body can activate around dates that you've completely forgotten about. Being aligned with ourselves somatically is another way we can flesh out a deeper grief work experience and use the wisdom we've internalized to our benefit. The body is a powerful tool in grief work, storing the experiences of our lives for us to address another day, whether we like it or not. This is a big reason why our traumatic experiences impact our health. Eventually, our bodies can no longer carry the weight of our pain in silence. So, back to the big question: does this grief thing ever get easier? And is easier even the right way to phrase the question? Well, unfortunately, I'm sorry to say that the answer to that question relies on you, but not just on your definition of easier. One of the tools I use in coaching is REBT, or Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy, which essentially boils down to cultivating a practice of unconditional self acceptance, other acceptance, and life acceptance. Pretty simple, right? Oh, okay. It doesn't start with simply asking us to choose a different way of thinking. It starts by asking us to curiously investigate our core beliefs around self, others, and life. We're going to look at the three irrational core beliefs that we see in individuals that deserve to be challenged because those irrational beliefs lead us away from feeling settled, grounded, and safe enough to explore our vulnerability. Those three irrational beliefs are approval, everyone must like me; judgment, everyone must do what I think is best; and comfort, life must be easy for me without discomfort or inconvenience. The third irrational core belief about comfort is where I'll focus today. This is a need for certainty, comfort, justice, and security that creates a demand in our lives where we expect all things to be pleasant, all conditions to be favorable to us, and all circumstances to be predictable and controllable. You can see pretty easily where grief disrupts that notion, but that's also why so many of us struggle with the idea of grief work in the first place. When it comes to grief, there are no set programs. Anyone telling you that a 5 session package will address your grief work is misunderstanding the intensity of grief. We know our grief is activated by simple things like smells, dates, and other people, and things we cannot control. However, this REBT framework allows us to get curious about the way we have allowed ourselves to experience grief in the first place or denied ourselves that experience. For the sake of clarity, let's assume we share a definition of, quote, easier grief that sounds a little like this: my grief will not disrupt my daily plans, but will submit to my schedule. My grief will make sense to me and will always allow me to decide how much I can handle at a time. My grief will be comfortable enough that I can tolerate it no matter how long I've been grieving. If any of those resonated even a tiny bit, be kind to yourself right now. A lot of this is a subconscious agreement that we've made with ourselves that we may not have noticed, and we wouldn't know that it's affecting the way we grieve. Okay, so give yourself some grace here. In order for us to decide if our grief is going to get easier, we have to decide if the definitions we hold and beliefs we carry about our grief are rational. And to be clear, I'm not saying that grief is rational, but the way we approach our grief work can be placed within a framework that invites us to challenge irrational thinking, trading it for core beliefs that support healthy movement forward through grief. Those three statements I gave about an easier grief experience are rational and usable if we can prove that they are true. Unfortunately, each one of them points to a reinforcing or subconscious belief about comfort that just isn't true. So, the first one, grief will not disrupt my plans, assumes that we have control over the way life should go. But we know we can't control life around us. We can only control our responses to life. Empirically, we can prove that to be true. So, immediately, we know we can't trust the first need of, quote, easier grief. The second, my grief will make sense to me and I get to decide how much I can handle, is also false because this human experience means we're not going to avoid grief. It's not possible because grief is as natural to life as breathing. It's part of our human experience. And the third, grief will be comfortable and tolerable despite the time frame, creates stress and anxiety in our bodies, minds, and hearts and spirits, our whole self, when we find we are unable to tolerate the amount of grief in our lives or limit the time frame. So, long story short, too long didn't read. Easier depends on you. What do you believe to be true about grief? What level of intentional work have you done for yourself around the grief events? Funny enough, most of the grievers I work with hate journaling, and I can understand why. It's a wide open unknown. You have no idea what will surface or how long it will take to work through. That fear of a loss of control is the same core belief of comfort that we're talking about. But there's a chance you are someone who loves to journal. Maybe you can spend hours in a comfy chair, tea in hand, and tears flowing as you write every thought that comes to mind, and still, you find yourself waiting for the easier to land. My friend, it sounds as though this is a chance for you to consider investing in a new way to honor your life experiences and your losses. The way you integrate and find a lighter step is by creating meaning for you in the life you lead, even when it is wildly uncomfortable. There is nothing about this life that dictates we will be comfortable in our experiences. If anything, the opposite is true, as manifested in stretch marks on bodies after growing pains. We are marked. We are not supposed to live a life that is always happy, calm, collected, or perfect. So, the way we approach our idea of an easier grief means integrating what is demonstrably true about our life, others, and ourselves into the way we show up day to day. If crying at home through a journaling practice is easier than crying at work, then we become intentional about making space at home. Does that mean we won't cry at work? Not at all. But building our grief muscles means using them, then resting them, then using them again. Over time, the heavy lifting isn't so heavy because we've trained and learned new ways of moving that create safety and support where we need it the most. Thank you for listening to episode 84 of Restorative Grief. The way we define easier is going to shift over time, and that's fine. Going back to the weightlifting metaphor, what challenges you in week 1 of training will be your warm up in week 8. We have the power to move ourselves out of repetitive habits of avoidance, dismissal, spiritual bypassing, and minimizing our pain when we want to. But until we choose this nonviolent, loving way of embracing what we carry, we will likely keep looking for alignment with a faulty core belief and the language of shoulds all over ourselves. If this is your first time listening to Restorative Grief, thank you for becoming a listener. I love this show and the work, and I hope it's evident in my voice. The lack of grief support worldwide is being overcome one episode at a time, and I have listeners and patrons like you to thank for it. Speaking of which, this is the first month I've released a companion workbook for the episodes. If you're interested in obtaining a copy of it, you can become a patron through the show notes and subscribe for an immediate download. It will typically be available each month within 48 hours of the first episode release, and the workbook gives you a sneak peek at the coming episodes for that month too. The link for our Patreon is in the show notes, and you can find a transcript of this week's episode along with transcripts for other essays at mandykpart.com. Please remember to leave a review and subscribe to the show on Spotify or Apple or wherever you listen so you won't miss a thing. And consider sharing this episode with someone you love, because there's no harm in reminding people that you love them and keep them in your mind. And as always, one last thing before we go. Please remember, the only solution for grief is to do the work of grieving. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week.